You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on the reform of the EU's e-privacy rules.
People today can do almost anything online. We shop, we pay our taxes, and we keep in touch with friends on the other side of the world thanks to digital services like WhatsApp or Skype. But Europeans are concerned about their privacy.
And they're probably right, as existing rules to protect privacy online were adopted in 2002 when the internet was still in its infancy. But the Commission has made a proposal to modernise these rules and make them fit for today's digital world.
As the main objective of the European Commission's digital agenda, the development of a digital single market requires the strengthening of security and online users' trust.
To achieve this, Europe needs to have in place strong data protection and privacy rules to boost its digital economy and ensure the protection of fundamental rights, such as the protection of personal data and the right to privacy.
At present, protection of privacy in electronic communications is provided by the 2002 e-privacy Directive, which contains specific rules on confidentiality of e-communications, security of networks and services, data breach notifications, prior consent to spam and to cookies, and limited storage of traffic and location data.
The directive was updated in 2009, but it remained limited to traditional telecom operators. It did not succeed in harmonising national rules in e-communications and failed to solve problems related to management of cookies by users who are now overloaded with consent requests.
Since this last revision, electronic communication services have taken a giant leap forward. Today, consumers and businesses rely more and more on internet-based services to communicate, such as instant messaging, voice over IP, and web-based email. But these services are not covered by current privacy rules.
So the need to update e-privacy rules became progressively clear. An external study published in 2015 recommended to extend the rules to publicly accessible private networks such as airport Wi-Fi and to strengthen requirements for the use of cookies and spam.
1 year later, the results of a public consultation carried out by the Commission, together with a Eurobarometer survey, showed that the modernisation of the old rules could no longer be postponed.
The European Parliament had also repeatedly called for a revision of the rules, and in 2016 it urged the EU's executive to align e-privacy provisions with the new General Data Protection Rules.
The moment finally came in January 2017, as the Commission proposed a revamp of the e-privacy rules.
The review aims at reinforcing trust and security in the digital single market and to align rules for electronic communication services with the new world-leading standards of the EU's General Data Protection Regulation.
It seeks to enhance communications security and confidentiality, define clearer rules on tracking technologies such as cookies, and achieve greater harmonisation among member states. But what changes does it introduce? Let's look at it in more detail.
Legally speaking, one important change is that it takes the form of a regulation, so its rules will be directly applicable in every member state instead of a directive as before. In terms of the scope, perhaps one of the most important innovations is that it applies not only to traditional telecom providers but also to other market players, putting digital services like Messenger, WhatsApp or Skype under the same rules.
Moreover, the new rules would apply to the provision of e-communication services to end users in the Union, irrespective of whether the end user is required to pay for the service.
Different to the older directive, new rules will apply to both the content as well as metadata of communications. For example, who is sending and receiving the communication, the timing, location and duration of the communication, and location of the device, as well as the websites its user visited.
Other major aspects of the review include technological neutrality, meaning that all e-communications must be secure and confidential, regardless of which technology or service is being used, and new rules on tracking technologies.
Collecting information from the end user's device is allowed only if necessary for the communication transmission or to provide a service requested by the end user or with the user's consent. Users will also need to consent to websites using cookies or other technologies to access information stored on the computers or to track their online behaviour.
The new rules provide for the possibility that consent is given at the level of browser settings, when technically possible and feasible, to avoid the consent fatigue caused by pop-up banners used at present.
So no consent will be needed for cookies which improve the internet experience, such as cookies needed to remember shopping cart history or for filling in online forms.
Spam and direct marketing communications will also require prior consent. This means that regardless of the technology used, users must agree to receive this type of information.
This will in principle also apply to marketing phone calls unless a member state opts for a solution that gives consumers the right to object to the reception of voice-to-voice marketing calls, for example, by registering on a do not call list.
Penalties for infringement of these new, tougher e-privacy rules may be severe, with fines of up to 4% of a company's total worldwide annual turnover. So there's no joking there.
Indeed, but how and when will the new rules be approved? Stay with us.
The European Commission wants to have the new rules adopted by the end of May 2018, when the new general data protection rules come into force. That could help companies that fall under both privacy laws adjust.
However, if negotiations are as long and heated as they were over the General Data Protection Bill, this deadline could prove rather unrealistic. But let's have a look at the different positions.
While consumers' organisations such as BEUC generally welcome the reform, although they propose some adjustments, some telecom platforms such as Digital Europe are sceptical about the benefits it could bring and fear it could even hamper European companies' ability to benefit from data-driven innovation.
At an institutional level, views are also mixed. In the report presented in June to the Parliament's Civil Liberties Committee, the rapporteur proposed some changes, focusing on consent as the main legal ground for exceptions to the core rules of confidentiality of e-communications and of terminal equipment.
The report stressed the need to apply the stricter conditions of the general data protection rules to the processing of data stored in users' terminal equipment, including in cases of machine-to-machine interaction and of connection with other devices or networks, such as Wi-Fi or hotspots. At the same time, privacy setting options should be easily accessible and changeable.
However, the more than 800 amendments submitted to the draft report show how divided MEPs still are over some critical issues, such as the admissibility or not of legitimate interest as a legal ground for further data processing, opt-in versus opt-out regimes, same versus different rules on content and metadata, and the regime applicable to Wi-Fi tracking.
And the situation is not much better at member states level, with some countries considering the new rules too restrictive and asking for more flexibility.
The Estonian presidency, which includes among its priorities a digital Europe and free movement of data, is determined to move ahead with the e-privacy proposal, and the Parliament is expected to hold its first reading vote in autumn 2017.
But with such a hot file, the Commission's timeline for adoption of the new rules may prove a little too tight.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.